Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats are pushing hard to impeach President Trump over a conversation he had with the Ukrainian president. House Judiciary member Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner will respond. And the president delivered an historic speech on religious liberty at the UN this week. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, is here with analysis. And will the UK ever Brexit from the EU? NILE GARDINER of the Heritage Foundation will discuss. And finally, how can we navigate the madness of the modern PC culture? Dale Hudson, author of How to Keep from Losing Your Mind, is here with some practical advice. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. A great show for you tonight. Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, Ambassador Sam Brownback, NILE GARDINER, and Dale Hudson are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Sam Brownback is coming up, but first, some breaking news. House Democrats renewed their push to impeach President Trump this week in the wake of revelations that the president reportedly asked Ukraine's president to investigate the business dealings of former Vice President Joe Biden and his son, Hunter. The transcript of the phone call in question was released on Wednesday. Here with analysis of the situation and to explain the House rules governing impeachment is member of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner. Congressman, thank you for being here. Are you having a bit of deja vu about all of this, Congressman?
More horror than deja vu. Chairman Nadler has completely ignored the procedural safeguards that we used in the Clinton impeachment 20 years ago. Here's what he's done. He has had hearings where the president has not been able to have witnesses come and defend the president, present a defense. He has broken House rules. He is now talking about not having a vote to establish a formal impeachment inquiry, which was done in both the Clinton and Nixon impeachments. And the reason that he's doing that is that he is denying the President of the United States due process because with a formal inquiry, the President will be able to present a defense, will be able to cross-examine witnesses, and let the American public know exactly what happened, rather than having the far left of Jerry Nadler, Nancy Pelosi, and the Judiciary Committee Democrats dominate the news cycle.
Speaking of Nancy Pelosi, I want to play this. This was from earlier in the week, actually before the full transcript of this conversation between the Ukraine president and Trump was released. Nancy Pelosi had this very dramatic announcement of a formal impeachment. Watch.
And this week, the president has admitted to asking the president of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the president's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. I'm directing our 6 committees to proceed with their investigations under that umbrella of impeachment inquiry. The president must be held accountable. No one is above the law.
What do you make of that announcement? And what does this really mean, Congressman Sensenbrenner?
Well, it doesn't mean anything because she's refused to put on the floor a motion to have a formal impeachment inquiry, which Republicans did against Clinton 20 years ago and which Democrats did against Nixon in 1974. Once again, the Speaker's mouth has gone into third gear before her mind started up. They didn't have a copy of the transcript of the speech with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Now we are seeing before the House votes on a demand that the whistleblower's complaint be submitted to the House. That's being submitted as the House is debating this issue. If they want to be a lynch mob, the American public will understand this as such. We ought to get back to legislating. That's what we were elected to do, rather than tying up the country and debating impeachment for the next 9 months to a year.
Yeah, it seems like we just went through this for 2 years with the Russian collusion bit. Nothing came of that, or nothing that they could prosecute the president on or impeach him over. So now it's this call with the Ukrainian president. Just to give the audience a fuller understanding, I'm going to put up the transcript. This was released on Wednesday. Here's what the exchange between President Zelensky and President Trump sounded like. This is the relevant part everybody's talking about. This is Zelensky. We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next step. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes. Then President Trump says, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with the whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that, so whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so you can take a look into it. It sounds horrible to me, end quote. Now, first of all, that line about, can you do me a favor, Congressman Sensenbrenner, that is what Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats are hanging their impeachment talk on. That they say that this is a quid pro quo implied.
All of us have asked friends or acquaintances to do them a favor. There's not a quid pro quo involved in that. It's just saying, please look into this. Now, what happened is that Biden was in the Ukraine asking that the prosecutor that was investigating Hunter Biden's son's company for corruption be fired. Now, if this was done in the United States, that's a clear case of obstruction of justice. But I guess because it was done in the Ukraine, it's not. It's corrupt. Biden got involved in this, and his son was making over $600,000 a year from the company that was being investigated. I think that's outrageous, and if that's the case, maybe Biden's going to end up being the collateral damage for what this drive for impeachment Pelosi has decided to lead will happen.
Does any of this sound like a betrayal of the oath of office or of our national security to you? You've been on this committee on the judiciary for 40 years. Does it reek of corruption to you, as Nancy Pelosi implies?
You know, clearly not. You know, we do have something that is called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And if United States citizens are involved in any type of bribing of foreign government officials, the Justice Department should go after them. And they've done that a number of times because in many cases the foreign corrupt practices have ended up disadvantaging American companies that don't go bribing foreign officials to foreign companies that do. And this is a way to protect American jobs and American businesses, which is something Donald Trump has been for ever since he became a candidate for president.
Yeah. I want to play this for you. This is Congressman Adam Schiff. He is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, one of the committees entrusted by Pelosi with investigating these charges. Here's what he had to say about the conversation between Zelensky and President Trump. Watch.
The notes of the call reflect a conversation far more damning than I or many others had imagined. It is shocking at another level that the White House would release these notes and felt that somehow this would help the president's case or cause. Because what those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader. They reflect a Ukrainian president who was desperate for U.S. support, for military support to help that country in a hot war with Putin's Russia.
Was this a mafia-style shakedown in your estimation, Congressman Sensenbrenner? And does it merit a call for impeachment or even an inquiry?
Clearly not on both counts. You know, the fact of the matter is that the mainstream media over last weekend was talking about Trump talking about Biden 8 times. The transcript indicates that he only talked about Biden once, and that was because of an issue that was raised by President Zelensky. Now, you know, my opinion is this is much ado about nothing. And furthermore, the Inspector General who got this whistleblower's report forwarded on because it was based on hearsay, and his cachet is only to investigate alleged misconduct in the intelligence community. The President of the United States is not an employee of the intelligence community or any other department. What the Democrats are trying to do is to reverse the result of an election that happened in 2016. They're going to tie the country up. We're not going to be legislating on major problems. And I doubt that if there is a Senate trial, it will not happen until sometime in the early to late spring of next year, when we're already in the season of having primary elections and choosing nominees. Wow. If they want to get rid of President Trump, you know, rather than tying the Congress and the country up, they ought to take their case to the American people. And I doubt that a damaged Joe Biden or an ultra left-wing socialist Elizabeth Warren is going to get the votes of Americans who don't want to be in the middle and don't want to have any taint of scandal, which Mr. Biden, I think, has got as a result of the events of the past week.
Do you think this could ricochet back on Joe Biden? You've got mention of this crowd strike group that secured these servers. The DNC, the Democratic National Committee, apparently contracted with them, but the servers are in Ukraine. That's what the president was asking about. It seems to my eye he was asking a foreign entity, a foreign country, to look into corruption in their country that may have affected our elections. Isn't that what everybody was so concerned about over the last 2 years?
Well, listening to my Democratic colleagues, you know, they thought that there was collusion between Trump and the Russian government. The Mueller report very clearly indicated that there was none, even though the Russian government tried to influence our election through pop-up ads on the internet and stuff like that. So, you know, they put all of their eggs in the Mueller basket. The bottom of the Mueller basket ended up collapsing, and the eggs fell on the floor and broke. Now they're looking at something else, and I think that this is equally speculative. And when the American people look at it away from the nonstop propaganda mill that we're hearing from the other side of the aisle, they will see that this is just another hit job on a president that they have done nothing but hate since the moment the election results were announced in November of 2016.
Congressman Sensenbrenner, I want to tie two things. Earlier in the interview, you talked about Nancy Pelosi not wanting to bring this to a vote of the entire House, which would really be the trigger for a formal impeachment inquiry. It's clear there are members of the Democratic caucus who don't want to vote on this because they've got an election they're facing. And then on the other hand, you've got these polls. The Mammoth poll, 57% of Americans against impeachment. A new Quinnipiac poll, 57% of Americans against impeachment. Why risk this politically when you're so close to another election?
Because she's got, you know, the left wing led by the Squad, the 4 freshman representatives on the Democratic side that have been pushing for impeachment and all other kinds of extremely left-wing socialist legislation that they want to get passed. The American people aren't for that. You know, we're a moderate to conservative country, and they were sick and tired of what had happened in the swamp, and Donald Trump was able to put his finger on that and ended up winning the White House, even though none of them expected that ever to happen. But there's another thing that is involved in this as well, and that is due process for the president. without a formal vote on an impeachment inquiry, which Pelosi might lose. The fact is that what is going on in the Judiciary Committee and other committees does not give the president due process. He is not able to confront his accusers. He is not able to put on his own witnesses. And what they have done is completely forgotten in this country is that someone is innocent until proven guilty. And if we ever flip that around where you're guilty until proven innocent, you know, one of the things that has made America the country that it is the fact that you do have a presumption of innocence until either a jury or somebody else that is empowered to do that concludes that you're not innocent. And in a criminal case, it's unanimous and beyond a reasonable doubt.
Final question. I mean, you have real experience here. You were mentioning something before we started that you really have a historical asterisk next to your career. You're resigning at the end of this, or you're going to be in Congress till the end of this term, leaving in January. Inform people about, I mean, you really hold a historical marker here for having been involved in more of these impeachment inquiries than anyone else. What would your advice be to the White House and to the Democratic leadership about this rush to impeachment?
Well, I think the rush to impeachment, the White House is going to have to take it seriously because Pelosi, I think, is going to try to get the votes to keep her caucus in line at least until the election. Now, she may lose some seats over this when the public sees how this plays out over the next year. You know, the Republicans are going to be, you know, very, very aggressive, which I hope I'm doing right now, you know, and pointing out that this latest iteration, which involves the transcript with the president of the Ukraine, you know, is nothing more than hot air. And, you know, hopefully they will turn their concern about global warming and closing down some of the hot air that is coming. You know, I have done, as a manager or prosecutor elected by the House, 4 impeachments in the Senate, the Clinton impeachment, and 4 federal judges who were impeached and removed from office. In the history of the country, there have only been 19 or 20 impeachments ever voted by the House. Only one against the president, because Clinton was impeached and tried. Nixon resigned, which dropped the impeachment charges. But nobody has handled more impeachment trials in the Senate than I have in the history of the country. So I do have an institutional memory. And what they don't realize is the Senate requires that everything be proven from scratch, meaning we lawyers say it has to be tried de novo. And it is one heck of a lot of work to be able to put together a case where you start out with a blank sheet of paper. And again, you're dealing with reversing the decision that the voters made in 2016.
Do you see this stretching clear to the next election? I mean, that process you just described, we are clearly looking at something that could run till November of 2020.
Well, they're going to try to speed it up by narrowing the focus on this. There's some talk in the Democratic caucus of only using the Ukraine fiasco, but Nadler has already said that he is continuing to investigate the other things that the Judiciary Committee has been tied up in doing. And does this mean that if the first impeachment fails, they're going to try and try and try again? Because they never can take no for an answer. They didn't take no for an answer when the people of this country elected Donald Trump. They're not taking no for an answer on having one investigation after the other. There are 20 separate investigations going on in these 6 House committees. Wow. And, you know, then when there's a Justice Department investigation or 2 or 3, you know, they cry bloody murder. You know, the hypocrisy here, you know, is just overwhelming. And the American public is going to have to look behind the hypocritical press releases and MSNBC interviews to figure out exactly what's going on. It's tying up the Congress from doing the business we were elected to do.
Congressman Sensenbrenner, I'm going to have to leave it there. I thank you so much for your insight and for being here, and we will talk to you again in the coming days.
Thank you very much, Raymond.
President Trump visited UN headquarters in New York this week to shine a light on the problem of global religious persecution. In doing so, he became the first U.S. president in history to host a meeting at the UN on the subject of religious freedom. Joining me now with his analysis of this historic event is the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom at the U.S. State Department, Sam Brownback. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. I want to give people a glimpse of the president's global call to protect religious freedoms. Here's how he began.
The United States is founded on the principle that our rights do not come from government, they come from God. Regrettably, the religious freedom enjoyed by American citizens is rare in the world. Approximately 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious liberty is threatened, restricted, or even banned. Today, with one clear voice, the United States of America calls upon the nations of the world to end religious persecution.
Ambassador Brownback, President Trump also announced the U.S. is committing $25 million to protect religious freedoms, religious sites and relics from attacks. How will that money be used?
That's being developed now. Next week, I'll be at a conference in Morocco that we're going to be doing with AID and others in the Moroccan government to discuss these religious heritage sites, many of them that have been degraded, fallen into disrepair, or in some cases destroyed because of opposition to that faith. And we're going to be talking about how do those things get protected, how can we lift them back up, and how can we make them into the valuable sites again that they are, and the world can recognize the beauty of what they've given to their countries and their areas.
Now, Ambassador Brownback, how practically will this initiative work that the president unveiled at the UN? How do you and your confreres interact with these other countries to move forward the cause of religious liberty and freedom?
You know, I think these things are tied together. The big thing the president put out, though, was the International Religious Freedom Alliance. And the Secretary Pompeo talked even further about that, about if you're a country that loves religious freedom, come join us. So we are asking for other nations who value and treasure and are willing to push for religious freedom to join us in this alliance to push this cause around the world, because religious freedom has degraded over the years, and we've got so many people, records numbers of people, being persecuted for their faith now.
Yeah. Now, some critics say that the president's call for this protection of religious freedom is a play to his political base. Other critics, like Rabbi Jack Moline, who's president of the Interfaith Alliance, say this: President Trump was elected on the promise of a complete and utter shutdown of Muslim immigration in the U.S. Since then, his administration has worked tirelessly to redefine religious freedom as a license to discriminate. End quote. How would you respond to that?
I totally disagree with this. Here is a fundamental human right, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and our Bill of Rights. It's in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, one of the fundamental charters, Section 18, is about religious freedom, but it has been degraded over the years, and nobody has stood up and fought for it. This administration is fighting for this right for people everywhere, all the time, around the world. The United States, we're not perfect by any means, but we're one of the best in the world on religious freedom, and we're going to push that because it's a fundamental right. It's a God-given right for everybody, everywhere around the world.
Ambassador, approximately 80%, as the president said, 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious liberty is threatened, restricted, or banned. Did the president raise religious rights with Pakistan's PM or Egyptian President al-Sisi?
I don't know if he raised it specifically with them. We have it in our report every year. We do a religious freedom report. The United States government does. It's the gold standard around the world, and we raise those issues and put them out there. And then I discuss it, and the Secretary of State's discuss it. I don't know about the President's meetings if he has or not. But I'd also say on this, Raymond, this administration has done more to pursue and push international religious freedom than any administration has before. We are pushing it. We're certainly not perfect, but this needs to have a broad basis of push. We'll have a meeting in the Vatican with the Vatican officials next week to discuss this very topic of religious freedom and how we push it together.
Ambassador, how does the U.S. justify relations with countries like with China, who are some of the worst abusers of religious freedom, or Saudi Arabia? How do you square that with this devotion to human rights and religious rights?
You square it under the idea that we need to engage. And I've been very critical of both of those governments, and many people around the United States government have. But we believe it better in those cases to engage and to try to push them on forward. In some cases, we put some pretty heavy sanctions on forward, and people they don't like that. But I think it's key that we do engage. But the bigger piece on this right now, Raymond, is this alliance. We need it to be more than the United States. We need it to be other nations to engage and help us with this push.
President Trump also used his time at the UN to speak on the international right to life. Here's what he said.
Americans will also never tire of defending innocent life. We are aware that many United Nations projects have attempted to assert a global right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, right up until the moment of delivery. Global bureaucrats have absolutely no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God.
Ambassador Brownback, you were there at the UN. How was that received by the international community? What did people tell you?
Well, I think people receive it as this is a clear statement from the United States president. There are nations and places that don't agree with it. There are groups and causes that do agree with it. And this is one of the key divisive issues of the day, is the question about the sacredness of human right and human life, and when does that attach? We believe it begins at the very moment of conception. And the president was bold and aggressive in putting that statement out in front of the UN. I'm not sure if something that clear has been said by a United States president ever before.
No, not at the UN. No, not at that level. In fact, I can remember covering Hillary Clinton years ago at the UN Population Conference, where it was just the opposite message. Nonetheless, several countries and women's groups have expressed alarm at those comments. They claim the U.S. is putting unfair pressure on poor countries that depend on U.S. aid to deny women abortion access. You would say what?
Well, I would say this has been a long-term political debate in the United States on this taxpayer funding of abortion. And you generally get a Democrat administration in and they want to fund it. You get a Republican administration in, they don't want to fund it. I'd say this is part of that ongoing discussion and debate within the United States. Other nations need to decide their own position and view on this issue of the sacredness of life.
Climate change really was center stage at these UN meetings earlier in the week. Pope Francis even sent a message to the UN where he had this to say.
Junto a tantas iniciativas, no solo por parte de los gobiernos, sino de toda la sociedad civil, es necesario preguntarse si existe una verdadera voluntad política para destinar mayores recursos humanos, financieros y tecnológicos a fin de mitigar los efectos negativos del cambio climático y ayudar a las poblaciones más pobres y vulnerables, que son las que más lo sufren. Aunque la situación no es buena y el planeta sufre, la ventana para una oportunidad está todavía abierta, todavía estamos a tiempo. No dejemos que se cierre. Humano integral para asegurar a las generaciones futuras una vida mejor. El futuro es de ellos, no nuestro.
Ambassador, what do you make of the Pope suggesting that there's a lack of political will to deal with climate change and really throwing the moral force of the Vatican behind it?
Well, this is not my portfolio, obviously, because I'm in the religious freedom space. But what I would say on this issue is that the United States is very concerned about what takes place to the environment. And we've been one of the more aggressive countries on cutting back our impact to the environment. Even though we don't get a lot of credit for it, because the rhetoric sometimes is seen as in a different category, if you look at the actual efforts and the actual things that have been done by the United States and by a number of good groups in the United States to reduce the CO2 emissions and to really be effective in this space, there are not many countries that have been as successful in addressing this issue as the United States, even if the rhetoric that is such that what people don't like.
Before I let you go, Ambassador Brownback, in China this week, Christian churches have been ordered to take down displays of the Ten Commandments and replace them with quotes from Xi Jinping, which promote socialism and warn against the influence of the West on China. Now, some have not complied, and they've been imprisoned or the church has been shut down. Worshippers at non-compliant churches have reportedly been threatened with governmental blacklisting, restricted travel. The children of some believers have been barred from schools and jobs. Your response to that story?
Well, my response is just, I think this is horrific of what's taking place in China. China's at war with faith. It's a war with all faiths. It's at war with Christians. It's been at war with Muslims, with Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong groups. And I think this should stop. They are signed on to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. They have in their Chinese constitution the right to religious freedom, and yet they're persecuting their own people. And it doesn't mean that in a faith that you can write the faith the way you want it in your country. Christianity was written a long time ago. It doesn't need to be sinicized. And so really, I would hope they would stand up for the right of the Chinese citizen to practice their own faith the way they see fit, rather than being driven into this dogmatic, government-run view of a faith that's not the true faith itself.
Sam Brownback, thank you so much for being with us. And to learn more about the work of the ambassador at large on behalf of international religious freedom, you can visit the U.S. State Department website. They're at state.gov. Thank you for being here. Britain's highest court ruled Tuesday that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks in the crucial countdown to the country's Brexit deadline was illegal. Supreme Court President Brenda Hale said the suspension was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification, end quote. The decision immediately prompted calls for Johnson to quit. House of Commons Speaker John Bercow said in a written statement that the ruling vindicated the right and duty of Parliament to meet at this crucial time to scrutinize the executive and hold ministers to account. Johnson, who is in New York for the UN General Assembly, has refused to say whether he will resign. Joining us to analyze all of this is director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, NILE GARDINER. NILE, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you back. Now, Johnson has claimed that he shut down Parliament to prepare for this new session. He was given a green light by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and the Supreme Court claims the suspension of Parliament was unlawful, but did not rule on Johnson's motives. However, many in the UK are saying his motive was a contempt of democracy, an abuse of power. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that Boris Johnson's motive really is to deliver democracy. I mean, he's 100% committed to delivering the Brexit referendum result from 2016, which is the will of the British people. Prorogation or suspension of Parliament, as it's known, is not unusual in British politics. It happens every single year. In this case, perhaps the prorogation was longer than typical, but this is perfectly normal parliamentary procedure. Multiple governments have used this, and I have to say that the Supreme Court decision here is being widely attacked by Brexiteers as an intervention by the Supreme Court in parliamentary affairs and procedure. Highly unusual, actually, and there's no precedent for this at all. And so Johnson has accepted the ruling, but he is saying that it's another example of those who are trying to stop Brexit from happening, basically acting in this case. And so he is calling for Parliament here to respect the will of the British people and move forward with Brexit on October the 31st. And Boris Johnson isn't going to be resigning. He isn't going to be going anywhere. He's going to be staying as Prime Minister.
There are all those calls for his resigning, and even I was stunned. I was watching the BBC, and there was Nigel Farage saying that Boris should at least offer his resignation to the Parliament, not leave, but offer the resignation, really out of respect to the body. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Boris Johnson should stay where he is and continue to lead the British country, the British people. He is a man who I think is firmly committed to delivering democracy, which is what the Brexit vote was all about. 17.4 million Britons voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Johnson is fully committed to doing so. Unfortunately, the Remainers in Parliament are doing everything they possibly can to try and block Brexit. And as the Attorney General was saying today, in his view, he said the current Parliament is dead. It simply doesn't respect the democratic will of the British people.
What do you make? The timeline isn't moving, as you said a moment ago. October 31st is the day.
Yes.
Will he find the support he needs in this, what you just said is a dead Parliament? The fact is they may be dead, but they're still holding their seats.
Yeah, that's true. And so Johnson has a couple of options here. Firstly, he's trying to get a deal with the European Union, an EU withdrawal agreement that will be acceptable to Parliament. That's going to be very, very difficult, of course, for the Prime Minister to get, not least because the majority of Parliament at the moment is against Brexit. The second option, of course, is to go around the demand of Parliament requesting an extension to Article 50 of the European Union Treaty. Johnson has said he's not going to agree to that extension. He has said he's going to deliver Brexit on October 31st. I think he's absolutely right to promise to deliver Brexit on October 31st because Parliament here is not fulfilling the wishes of the British people. And that's the role of Parliament, to implement the democratic will of the British people. They're simply not doing that. Johnson is saying he's going to move forward with Brexit on October 31st, which is the legal default position.
Now, what about the suspension of Parliament? He's claiming, Boris Johnson is, that he will suspend Parliament again. Can he do that now, in light of this ruling?
Well, he can do so. I think he has the right to prorogue Parliament again. No doubt the courts will have their say again on this matter, but certainly as a Prime Minister, he has the right to call for the suspension of Parliament once again, and we'll have to see what happens. Certainly, Johnson is holding that out as a possibility right now.
Well, if no deal can be made with the EU, what happens to the British economy? I mean, this was the same thing that was hanging over Theresa May's head.
Yeah, so if Britain exits under a no-deal scenario on October the 31st, Britain is going to do just fine outside of the European Union under a no-deal scenario. It simply means that Britain trades with the rest of the world under World Trade Organization terms. And Britain is the world's fifth largest economy. There's a huge amount of foreign investment continuing to flow into Britain in the Brexit era. I think Britain is going to do very, very well outside of the EU under a no-deal scenario. And already President Trump has indicated that the United States is going to fully support Great Britain, deal or no deal with the EU.
And this is a great segue. This is Boris Johnson and Donald Trump this week at the UN General Assembly talking about trade between the two countries. Watch.
We can quadruple our trade with UK, and we can, I think, really do a big job. Bob Lighthouser's here, our trade representative. Your trade representative is here. And they're already scheduled today to continue negotiations.
And I certainly hope that we can make a lot of progress quite fast on trade.
The UK, depending on its trade with the US, it could actually see a boost in its economy.
Yeah,
and other countries.
Absolutely. I think that a US-UK free trade deal would be great for both the US and the British economy. Already, over 1 million Britons rely upon US companies for their jobs, and vice versa. We have a huge amount of trade investment between the world's largest and fifth largest economies. A US-UK free trade deal would further advance that trade and investment across the Atlantic, creating a lot of additional jobs for British and American workers. So this is a win-win situation for both sides. President Trump is 100% committed to a US-UK free trade agreement. That's great news for Brexit Britain.
Yeah. The president ratcheted up the tough talk against China this week, also at the UN. I want to play a little bit of this for you and then get your reaction on how this plays in Britain. How important is the US cracking down on China for its trade violations? How does that affect the UK? Watch.
The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that will be beneficial for both countries. But as I have made very clear, I will not accept a bad deal for the American people.
The implication here is you won't accept a bad deal for the rest of the world either, because if the United States were to accept it, really the rest of the world would have to go along.
Yeah, I think Britain has an interest in China playing by the rules that everyone else follows on the world stage. And China has been playing by the rules for many, many decades. And President Trump has said enough is enough. And certainly I think the United Kingdom would benefit from China changing its behavior. And also I think the United Kingdom would benefit from a China that also does not seek to steal intellectual property, for example, or infiltrate the security networks through 5G, for example.
Right.
And so I think that it's in Britain's interest for a China to play by the rules that everyone else plays by on the international stage. At the same time, though, I think that Great Britain would be concerned, though, about a larger trade war that could possibly come in. So certainly the UK would like to see a US-China trade deal, but the Chinese really have to make significant concessions for that to happen.
I want to shift gears slightly, but this is related, and it's often not reported this way. There was a lot of media attention on the climate summit this week on the edges of the UN meeting, the General Assembly meeting. Greta Thunberg, that 16-year-old activist from Sweden, had this to say about climate change. Watch.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
Niall, I want your thought, because she subsequently, along with some other teens, listed countries that they would like to see act on climate change. Notable on that list for its absence was China.
Yes.
Your thoughts on what impact this could have on trade as well as human rights using this climate agenda, if you will?
Yeah, well, I think that China is the world's biggest polluter. And yet you don't see calls for China to act. All of the focus is upon the United States. There's a great deal of America bashing that goes on among climate activists, of course. And there's a lot of anti-capitalist sentiment as well that is there. And without a doubt, I think that these climate activists should be focusing upon the real polluters in the world, especially upon China. Who, without a doubt, do more actually to pollute the world than any other country.
Yeah, no, it was remarkable that they would carve out China. Yes. And as someone, a longtime UN reporter told me this week, had Greta Thunberg and these other climate activists tried to do this protest in Beijing,
yes,
they would be quickly rounded up and silenced. They wouldn't have to worry about, doing the rounds of the talk shows.
That's the irony of it, isn't it? Really? And they're not focusing on China, funnily enough, actually.
Yeah. I want to move on before we go and talk about Iran. Again, Iran was a centerpiece of discussion at the UN this week. The President Trump raised it. I want your reaction to this and what we could be seeing next.
All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened.
Are the sanctions working, Niall? And what is the reaction to the rest of the world when they hear that?
Well, I think the sanctions are working, actually. And what you're seeing with the Iranian regime is a desperate regime lashing out. It's a regime that's in serious trouble. The Iranian economy is sinking to its knees.
Yeah.
You have soaring inflation, rising unemployment. You have economic growth that is negative in Iran. This is an economy in deep, deep trouble. US sanctions are hitting very, very hard. And so I would argue that the maximum pressure regime is having the effect that's intended. It's weakening Iran's ability, actually, to, in the long term, I think, act as the world's biggest state sponsor of international terrorism. But you are seeing the Iranian regime lashing out, trying to intimidate, trying to get those sanctions lifted. We mustn't in any way lessen our guard, reduce the sanctions that are in place. We mustn't follow, for example, the advice of Emmanuel Macron.
I was about to say, Macron's trying to facilitate a deal here and has brought everybody back to the table, including the U.S., he claims.
Yeah, exactly. Macron is proposing some kind of $15 billion bailout fund for Iran, which is the typical French approach to these things, which is one of complete, utter appeasement, even surrender, frankly.
Well, we'll keep our eye on this, but I agree with you. This is a dangerous regime in the region and the world. Thank you, Niall, for being here. You can also follow the work of Niall Gardiner at the Heritage Foundation. The shifting sands of prevailing culture can certainly be difficult to navigate. How can we avoid the politically correct groupthink that dominates all over society? My next guest has a simple remedy. Revisit the classics. He's the author of a new book, How to Keep from Losing Your Mind, Educating Yourself Classically to Survive Cultural Indoctrination. Here to tell us all about it is editor of thechristianreview.com, Diehl Hudson. Now, I want to start with why you wanted to write a book like this. This was a surprising book, I have to tell you. I've read a lot of your books. This felt the most personal, like you were accompanying the reader.
I wanted to write, Raymond, what I've loved all my life. And really what I loved that led me into the Catholic Church. If you recall, I wrote a conversion story. And many of the same themes about beauty, about the appeal of the arts, the importance of fiction and music are in my conversion story, but I decided, it's been a long time. So I decided to, as it were, let it all hang out. I just laid my heart bare in this book. These are the things I love. And in a time when there's so much negativity, I mean, news, front pages, it's all filled with criticism and anger and hatred and accusations. I said to myself, I want to lay out what gives me joy. I want to lay out what makes me wiser. I want to lay out what makes me more human. And so I really dug as deeply within myself as I could, and I came up with this book.
Yeah. Well, I love the line. You have Socrates quoted inside, and you say, wisdom, or Socrates says, wisdom begins in wonder. And this is kind of filled with artistic wonder, musical wonder, even films. Why now? You talk about a teacher you met early in high school.
He was the janitor.
I know. Well, he ended up being a teacher, but he was a janitor. Tell that story and how that led you to this book.
I was in the senior play, and I was only there because I wanted to kiss the girl playing Anna.
That's always a good reason.
After rehearsal one night, the janitor asked me to come talk to him. He was a young, very handsome man, and he asked me if I had ever read Plato, and I said no, or Socrates, no. And he said, and he gave me his beautiful Princeton-bound dialogues of Plato. And then he said, and I want you to read these and come back. And when I came back, the first question was, what precedes first, existence or essence? And I didn't realize he was introducing me to the main philosophical and theological issue that I would go on to study for the rest of my life.
Wow.
I did say existence.
Yes.
I got it right.
You got it right. See that? You did. I would have said essence. So that's why you're you and I'm not.
That's why you're a news guy.
That's right. Stick with the essence. The book, How to Keep from Losing Your Mind. About what? Against what? What are we losing our minds to? What you suggest here is somehow the restorative.
Well, we're constantly getting the message that nothing is true, really. Nothing is true.
My truth.
Yeah.
This is my truth.
My feelings, so forth. And we're constantly getting the message that all the traditional morals, all the traditional manners and customs that you and I learned growing up, are not necessary to live a good life. In fact, some of them are inherently racist, some of them are inherently against women, some of them are inherently a product of white privilege and so forth. And so we're constantly being told that the world you and I and many of your listeners grew up in was completely wrong, and you should tear it up and start over. And I decided to go back, and by relying on the text, the music, the films that have shaped our lives, I mean, deeply shaped our lives, and shape us even when we don't know they're shaping us, to go back to those and say to the reader, let's take another look. And you know, the internet has now made all these things and put them right at our fingertips. I mean, you can basically listen to the entire history of classical music on YouTube. You can get all the great texts of the Western world free. You can download the text on Gutenberg, for example. And then the issue of film, almost everything is available for maybe $6 a month if you go on the Criterion channel. These classic movies that I talk about, including John Ford, The Three Godfathers, the great John Wayne movie.
I saw over the Christmas holiday.
The great David Lynch, The Straight Story, which is an amazing film about forgiveness and the transformation that comes about with forgiveness. I mean, these are things I'm saying, look, give these things a chance. Maybe you left them behind, and they'll just lift you up.
This book is really art as formation. As personal formation.
Yes.
That's really what this is. And you open at one point with Rilke's great poem, who's always been one of my favorite poets. But in this day and age, the value of poetry and its presence has really diminished enormously.
Yeah, and it's too bad because I quote and discuss one of Dana Gioia's great poems about going into a clinic where children are dying. And it's so overpowering. I mean, poetry, as it were, gets past all our defenses, right?
Like music.
Poetry, like music. And philosophers have pointed out the connection between poetry and music. But it gets past us, and it resonates at a deeper level than just straight narrative. And there are lines in your favorite poet, whether it's Chaucer or Shakespeare, who I deal with, or Dante, who I deal with, that just kind of brand you on the heart in a way that you never get rid of.
Yeah, no, I'm one of those foolish people who drive around listening to Shakespeare.
I know you do.
I have the monologues
and probably have
car.
A lot of them memorized.
Well, I do, but there's nothing like it hits you like knives coming at you in different ways, and you never expect it. It's sometimes you're in a moment that day, and that the phrase you thought you knew your whole life will suddenly open up to you. That's the beauty of poetry, music. It cracks our soul open a bit.
Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love when it alteration finds, nor move with the remover to remove.
Yeah, that's it. And there it is.
I've known that poem for 50 years.
Wow. What's been the reaction? I'm interested in knowing.
Raymond, actually,
because this is really a curated tour through Dale Hudson's favorite works.
When I handed in this book to Tan, who great publisher, by the way, I felt like I was taking a big risk. I had really laid myself open. This was very personal for me. This is what I love. This is what I care about. This is what I consider valuable for other people to look at. I was recommending all this stuff. But the reviews on Amazon and the personal comments that have been made to me, the review on the American Spectator by Frank Buckley, all been amazingly positive. I'm sort of waiting for somebody to come slap me and say, wait a minute, you know.
Stay tuned, Dale. I might get the spirit.
That's right.
No, I won't. The Kindle version I love because it's got all the hyperlinks to either the documents or the music. You can watch Wagner. I mean, that's really the way to experience this via Kindle.
Almost everything I recommend, I have put in hyperlinks either to film scenes from the movies, the entire performance of the music I recommend. I mentioned John Dowland, the great Elizabethan composer, and I give you a hyperlink to a recording of all his songs and so forth. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the great things about living in a virtual world. There's absolutely no excuse not to educate yourself.
Well, what do you say to people? And I'm sure they're out there who say, wait a minute. I got the kids, I have the grandkids, I'm barely making ends meet. It's too late for me. All this stuff this is college seminar stuff. You'd say what?
take some time to yourself. Close the door, turn off the music, turn off the phone, take a half an hour, take an hour, pick up a book that you've always wanted to read or you want to reread. Just go do it. And what you find is you come out of that door enriched, you carry joy with you, you have a different look in your eye, and you're really better for all those people that you locked out for half an hour.
Yeah. You know, my old acting coach, Stella Adler, used to say, this platform is important. She would stand on the stage and say, this is where we teach the world what humanity looks like and reminds them of their humanity. And I dare say that is the artist's role. I mean, that's really what we should all be doing, what they should be doing. And that's not always the case today. It's become warped in so many ways with personal agendas and politics and really petty concerns compared to that big mission.
And I address that in the middle of the book. I warn the reader, you know, where multiculturalism has led, where postmodernism has led, where radical feminism has led, and basically to saying there's no common human nature. And where there's no common human nature, there's no common human narrative. And the ability to compare books to music, compare films to books, is dependent upon there being a common human nature. And I basically argue, and I think it can't be refuted, that there is a common human nature, even among those who claim there is not.
I love the section on Don Quixote that you go through. There's certain key works that you expand on in the book and share your own revelations about as you went into them. Tell us about Don Quixote, what you discovered when you came back to it, I guess, or read a biography of Cervantes.
Yes, you know, this happened to me over and over during this book. I went back to books I hadn't read since maybe college or graduate school, like Huckleberry Finn, or
great book.
You know, or The Scarlet Letter. And I would get in about 20 or 30 pages, and I go, "Wow, it's totally new. It's totally fresh. I'm seeing things there that I never saw before. I mean, I was a young man. And in the case of Don Quixote, which I compared to Shakespeare's Winter's Tale because Shakespeare and Cervantes were contemporaries. The case of Don Quixote, I found someone I kind of identified with. He had ideals. He had perhaps foolish ideals. He had dreams. He revered the past. He revered the past of heroes, of ladies in distress, of knights rescuing them from danger. And I relate to that. I mean, anyone who aspires daily to know more, to find more beauty in life, to be a better person, has got to see in Don Quixote a mirror of themselves.
Yeah, and I love the Sancho Panza revelation. Do you want to share that, or is it too much to give?
Well, with Sancho Panza, you find that
that had totally gone. I have to tell you, and I've read it twice.
Yeah.
I never really saw that until I
in Sancho Panza, you have someone who, first of all, realizes the foolishness of Don Quixote, but totally accepts it, embraces it, and defends it.
Right.
He knows that he's not that man whom he admires, but he understands that those kind of men need loyalty. They deserve it.
No, it's spectacular. Okay, now I noticed there is no Gershwin, Berlin, or Sinatra. So will that be in the subsequent Great American reads?
Yeah,
how to save your mind, how to keep you from losing your mind in America?
I actually think there ought to be a book that does the same thing, except with the best of American pop culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost get into that a little bit with some of the films I choose.
With The Godfather.
Yeah, but I think that it can be done not just with the great books. It should be done with these, for example, the Great American Songbook, which involves Sinatra and Nat King Cole and all these guys, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, and so forth, and my favorite, Jerome Kern.
Oh, yeah, beautiful.
But because I think the best of our pop culture brings us to the same place of self-discovery
and humanity
as the classic books.
Yeah, you're back to humanity and the codes and truths that are knitted into the human person that unite us all.
Listen, this book is premised on the fact that all human beings desire God. All human beings, in desiring God, desire the good, the true, and the beautiful. I'm assuming the authors, the composers, the filmmakers, regardless of what they claim they are, possess this desire for God, which was how their art came forth from that desire.
Great. Dale Hudson, thank you for being
Thank you,
here.
Raymond.
How to keep from losing your mind, educating yourself classically to survive cultural indoctrination by Dale Hudson is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Well, that's all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. You can like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And be sure to tune in to next week's show. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.